David, how's it going?
I'm doing very well, John. Thank you. How about yourself? How are you doing?
Doing excellent. Doing excellent. Boston is still the great place that you know it to be.
How's the weather up there at the moment?
Post Labor Day, it took a shift and it has gotten progressively colder since then, which is actually kind of nice. There's
Okay.
a definite crispness in the air now. So yeah, fully engaged in fall.
Okay. All right. Cool. Yeah. I'll be honest. I don't miss the cold weather. Although we've had a couple of cold days down here in Texas, yesterday and all the mornings at least. Like this morning it was in the 40s. So that felt quite fresh for me. I've become a little bit I guess desensitized to that. So yeah, it took a little while to get used to.
No, for sure it happens. As a native Californian, I can say that that warmer weather is my preferred variety.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm with you on that 100%.
So first of all, thank you so much for taking the time. I clearly have just a ton of respect for what you do in the world of track. Your story as an individual is a really compelling one, and I'm really honored that we're here to connect. So I want to take it kind of all the way back here with question number one and ask you just where you're from.
Okay, all right. Well, first I want to say, yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate you asking me to come on and share sort of, I don't know, I don't want to be too grand and say my story, but, just talk to you a little bit about myself. But yeah, so originally from the accent, you're going to guess I'm not American. So I'm from the south part of the UK. I grew up just outside London, about 30, 40 miles north of London, an area called Milton Keynes. So yeah, I spent the majority of my childhood growing up there, with a couple of years hiatus growing up in Western Australia as well. So Perth in Western Australia, I spent a couple of years there, sort of around 10 years old, and then a little stint in my early teen years as well. Actually, I've probably been a little bit younger than early teens. But yeah, so originally, yeah, from the UK, done a little bit of traveling, spent 5 years in the Middle East working in Dubai, so in 2013 to 2018, before heading out to the US.
Wow. So given that you've had this kind of my mother is an army brat, so she was born in Cleveland, but she like she lived in Kentucky, Germany, the Presidio, like Arizona, like all these other places. How did you kind of contextualize, going from spot to spot as a young guy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think the beauty of doing it when you're young is that maybe you sort of don't really know any different. So it's just, you just go with it. Like I don't know, I don't ever recall it being like challenging, thinking, oh no, right, I'm here, I've got to make a new set of friends or anything like that particularly. And the fact that as I've continued to travel sort of in my adult life and move about a bit, then I guess that sort of supports the idea that it was probably quite a positive experience for me. It's something that I enjoyed doing, seeing sort of different places. I don't think I ever would have said like I had, I know people that all they want to do is travel, like, they want to go backpacking across Asia and do all this kind of stuff. And that's not something that I've ever really, considered doing or thought about doing. But I've always liked knowing where different places are in the world and knowing a little bit about them. So I think that, like, as I say, it was a positive experience. And, I went to Australia, as I say, for a couple of years, went back to the UK. And I guess sort of in my early adult life, then, I saw an opportunity to go elsewhere. And because it was a positive experience going to Australia, I thought, okay, well, let's take on this challenge and see where it leads.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, out of just, of course, sheer curiosity as well, during these formative years that you're getting all these different, stamps in your passport and whatnot, was there any particular culture or zip code or time and place and era that you were like, oh man, like, just outside of London in those days was great, or like this one time in Australia, man, I like wish I could have just like stayed in that era of Oz or whatever?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that I definitely look back nostalgically about my time in Australia at the moment. Living, I think it was, I mean, I'm not sure which part of California you're from, but I know that they kind of say that Perth, which is in kind of on the southwest corner of Australia, they liken it to like a Southern California sort of like type of climate and lifestyle.
You're talking
And
to a native San Diegan here.
oh, right, okay, all right, perfect. Yeah, so I'm not sure that the weather in Perth is quite as good and consistent year round as it is in San Diego, but I mean, it's good weather. And yeah, I definitely look back on that with a lot of fond memories. And I think that if there was the opportunity to kind of go back out there, then it would be something that I would definitely very much consider. I think with the US, I think it was always a funny one. Like I always had this fascination with the States, and it wasn't anything rational. Like I'd never even been to the US, but I always had this thing, I just really want to go to the US. And I think it was probably, like me being young and impressionable from the media, a lot of American TV shows on in the UK, that kind of thing. So I always wanted to head out there.
So which
Um,
TV shows? I mean, like, drop some
yeah,
names.
well, I don't even know. I'm not even sure. As I say, it wasn't like a rational thing, like kind of growing up in the. So I was born in '82, so kind of late '80s, early '90s formative years. Probably watching a bit of Saved by the Bell, Fresh Prince of Bel Air, that kind of stuff. And it's like,
Okay.
okay, all right, I like that vibe. I could do a bit of that. So I'm not saying that I've made all my life decisions based upon the Fresh Prince of Bel Air, but it's funny how sometimes seeds get planted like that, and they kind of like
Yeah.
that they form these ideas and they form these paths.
And what about, I mean, I just have to ask you just two more things about the UK or
Mhm.
or Australia. I guess one, favorite bands that hail from these places. Two, soccer clubs, rugby, whatever.
Yeah, so I mean, music. Like, I would never really have considered myself like a big music guy. I mean, certainly in Australia, I don't recall being into sort of the local music scene at all. I kind of went through a phase sort of throughout probably like towards the end of my secondary school. So towards the end of high school in the UK, I quite like the garage scene, the garage music scene, which was, I guess, sort of like a branch of sort of like hip hop, very kind of like urban culture, that was quite popular in the UK back at that time. They had like So Solid Crew and Heartless Crew and stuff like that. But I would never have considered myself like a big sort of music aficionado or anything like that. In terms of sport, I mean, I've always been passionate about sport, and my first real passion was soccer. Growing up in the UK, that's probably quite normal. And Liverpool Football Club, although I grew up nowhere near Liverpool Football Club, I was a big fan of them. There was a guy called John Barnes who played for Liverpool around that time, sort of late '80s into the early '90s.
Michael Owen, shout out.
Michael Owen was a little bit later, but yeah, Michael Owen definitely. I mean, I remember him coming on the scene and sort of, I think he was 17 when he started becoming like really prominent. But yeah, I remember that was a little bit later. That was kind of towards like the late '90s. And then I quite like Tottenham Hotspur as well. They had two guys, so Gary Lineker, and a guy called Paul Gascoigne, who is a very interesting character to kind of like talk about himself. So Gaza, and they were both stars of the 1990 World Cup in Italy, where England did pretty well. They made the semi-finals, which they didn't get that far again until 2018, so the last World Cup. So it'd be interesting to see how they do in the upcoming World Cup next month.
Yeah, no, and then so it doesn't shock me, that you have this passion for soccer, which any sports loving, any kind of right-minded human being would look at the athletes on the pitch and just be totally amazed, right? I mean, you're
Yeah,
talking about people that have got all of the endurance in the world, but still this kind of like, skill level of like explosion meets sort of artistry that
yeah.
almost like no other sport in the world offers. Uh, and at the same time, here you are today, probably one of the most passionate people that I know about track and field.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think I've got like a very sort of, how would I say it, like an addictive personality. So like, a very, if I like something, then I go kind of very deep into it. Or I certainly have that. I certainly have, that tendency or that ability to do that. So to say like I was all in with soccer when I was young. Um, I went through phases where I quite like rugby as well, but I would be all in for, as a 7 or 8 year old, I'd be all in for those 3 weeks with rugby. It was rugby for those 3 weeks, for example. Um, and then another sport I got very passionate about was basketball. So kind of living in Australia, they had what they called it the NBL, so the National Basketball League there, and that was my first real exposure to basketball. But also the NBA at the time was quite well covered in Australia, and so that was during the Jordan era. Shaquille O'Neal was just starting out. You still had the likes of Karl Malone, and it was the dream team. So it was early '90s. So it was the dream team when they went to the Barcelona Olympics. So I kind of got really into that for a couple of years as well. I'd already been it's kind of, I think like track had sort of triggered me probably when I was around 8 years old. Like I remember the 1991 World Championship final, and that's probably my first real track and field memory. And the 100 meters, you had 6 guys that broke 10 seconds, and Carl Lewis won it, based in Houston. Leroy Burrell was second, also based in Houston. And then Linford Christie, a British guy, he was fourth. And so I got sort of, that was exciting to me. I kind of got into that. And then, over the next couple of years, sort of went in and out of a couple of different sports, and then probably settled on track sort of in the mid to late 90s. Probably like, I remember the 97 World Championships, where literally after that, I don't ever recall kind of another sport being, okay, this is now more important to me than track and field is. But yeah, like I've since that, yeah, really, really passionate about it. Just love it. There's just something about watching it. I think just kind of what you said, kind of going back to soccer, in terms of just watching somebody at that level, it's like artistry. And I think that watching anybody who's elite do
Yeah.
what they do, I think there's something impressive about it. And for me, just watching people run fast, I don't know, there's something like poetic about it, something I really enjoy about it. And I think especially seeing it live in person, I remember the first competition I saw really live in person, where I was old enough to quite kind of digest it, which I think was the 1999 British Championships. And I remember coming away from that, and it was a semi-final run, and Darren Campbell, a British guy, had just won his semi-final, and I came away from that thinking, okay, television doesn't do this justice. Like it looks a lot quicker. It looks a lot quicker in the flesh.
Without a doubt. No, I mean, the people who really truly love track, which of course I include myself in that bucket. The nuances of it, as with any sport, but there's this expression these days that people sort of throw around, like all these sort of buzzwords, and that expression is inside baseball. Like, oh man, you're kind of going inside baseball on me right now. Way too much insider information. Da 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 da. However, I think that when it comes to track and field, I don't actually think that there's an inside baseball aspect to it as much as there's just this outright unknown. It's sort of this outright kind of mystery, in a sense that only the people that have really competed in track and field, I think, really, truly, and completely understand those subtleties, those nuances, those like things that make race day obviously so similar but different to like a hardcore Monday workout. Like,
Right.
it's just like you just know that cycle of like what it means to be training in that kind of environment. Like you said, whether you're an elite, sub-elite, just person kind of getting into it. There's an energy in track that is totally unmistakable. And there's also this sort of undeniable, like, I love the Shaquille O'Neal quote. You can't fake the funk in a nasty dunk.
I've not heard that, but okay, I like that. Yeah.
I think it came from a Baby Ruth ad, but nonetheless, you can't fake the funk in a nasty dunk in track and field. You get there, you got your events. If the coach springs it on you that you got to run the 4x4 at the end of the meet or whatever, you can't fake any of it. There's no hiding from any of it.
Yeah, and I think that I think two of the things that I like about track and field, firstly, it's individual. So kind of going to your point, if you have a bad day, you can't hide amongst the rest of your team. Like it's gonna show up that you've had a bad day. And then you can actually attach a number to that bad day because you've got an objective data measurement for each event that you do. I mean, what I like about the objective data is that it's quite easy to track you can track your progress. You can see that, okay, well, like the clock is quicker now, so I'm running quicker. And sure, there's things like weather conditions, wind readings and stuff that might sort of like play into that, but typically it's if you're running faster, then you're a better athlete. So that's one of the things that I definitely like about it. And I think one of the things that makes track quite relatable is that everybody has gone through that experience of trying to run as fast as they can, or sprinting. Quite relatable, should I say. Everybody has tried to run as fast as they can, so they know what that feels like. And I distinctly remember the first time I watched myself, somebody had filmed me running as fast as I could. And there was a huge disconnect between what I was feeling, so what I was expecting to see, and then what I actually saw in the footage. Like there's a British coach called Jonas Dodu, and he first introduced me to the quote real versus feel. And the real did not match up with the feel. Like, I felt like I was absolutely flying. And I would imagine this is sort of how most people feel when they're trying to go as fast as they can. They feel like they're absolutely flying. And it's quite a humbling experience when you first watch that when you first see that footage, because you're like, is that all my arms and legs do? I thought I was moving quicker than that. And I think that really kind of gave me an appreciation for, okay, when I see these world-class guys running, it's like, okay, what must that feel like then? Because what I'm seeing is fairly different from what I'm seeing when I watch myself run. So I wonder what that feels like.
Yeah, no, so when you and I got together here in Boston for breakfast that day, and you were talking to me about this moment that you kind of, in a sense, I guess, like fell into this training group with Linford Christie, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
I was so amazed because one, I was very inspired. And two, getting back to your previous point, it in a sense almost kind of made me immediately think about like the second race that I ever had in college, where everybody in high school is sort of fast. If you're sort of fast in high school, you're sort of fast. And I was like a little bit like more football fast, 40-yard dash kind of stuff than I was like track fast. And I mentioned the second race part of it because in my first ever race in college, it was maybe like the most grotesque example of jumping the gun, but I just never got called for it. And I was like straight out the gate, like before anybody blinked. And before I know it, I'm like finishing like second or something. And you're so much adrenaline. It's your first race. So you're like, just like, oh, great. I did awesome. But then as college wears on, you realize you're like, wow, like some of these really elite track athletes, it's no different than like being a very quick 4-cylinder engine off the starting line in a car race versus like a car with 8 cylinders or something above that. And all of a sudden you realize that those extra cylinders are just carrying that person forward at a faster clip with each stride. And you're just like you said about my arms and my legs, you're like, well, I'm moving them as fast as they go. Why is this other person moving so much faster than me?
Yeah, there's absolutely levels to it. And as I say, it's can be quite humbling. I think one of the qualities that I have is that I was always willing to put my ego to the side and run with people a lot quicker than me because I thought it would help me get better. And I distinctly remember doing a block session. There was a guy in 2009 called Toby Sanderman, and he won the British 200-meter title that year. And he ran 20.37, something like that. It was a good 200-meter run. He ran 20.3. So, and I was doing block starts with him indoors at Brunel University in West London, and Linford was kind of running the session. He was calling the commands, and we were doing blocks over, I think we were doing over like 10 meters. And obviously Toby was smoking me because he's a very, very good athlete. And then, so I think Linford, he moved on one of the blocks. He either moved my blocks forward a meter or Toby's blocks back a meter. And Toby would still just kind of catch me on the line. And I remember Linford said to me, like, kind of, come on, haven't you got any pride? And I remember being, like, honestly, I really want to beat him. I'm really trying as hard as I can to beat him. But he's just better than me. There's nothing I can do about it. He's just better than me, a lot better than me. But I'm hoping that this experience is going to help make me better, and running with these people will help make me a better athlete. But yeah, you're right. There's nothing you can do about it. You're doing everything. You're pushing as hard as you can, trying to move as fast as you can. But people are going to be, unless you're one person, there's always going to be somebody in the world quicker than you. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah.
So yeah, like at some point you kind of just need to deal with that feeling of, you're trying as hard as you can, but there's somebody that's able to just do it a little bit better than you.
So no, without a doubt, without question. And I should also say, just, speaking of false starts, back to our friend Linford.
Yeah.
I'm a big Linford Christie fan. I think that he has just an amazing presence in the arena.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I think that he's a gentleman. I think I've always been very captivated by elite competitors who have great style as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I would definitely put Linford Christie in that right at the top of the heap there in that respect. How did you fall in with this training crew? Because it's not like everybody's just like hanging with Linford Christie and the rest, right?
Yeah, do you know what? I mean, I've been very fortunate to sort of just find myself in the presence of people at a very high level in track and field. I've just been really lucky, and just right place, right time is a lot of it. And I think that once you start forming relationships with, some people in that circle, then you meet other people in that circle. So I went to university in Cardiff in Wales. So University of Wales Institute Cardiff, which is now known as Cardiff Metropolitan University. So I went there in 2003. I started my degree, and in the UK it's a 3 year, 3 years to earn your bachelor's degree. And one of the reasons that I chose that university was because at the time it was the only university in the UK that had an indoor track and field facility. So
That's why you chose the school.
It was way up there. I mean, they offered the course that I wanted to do, but that was a big, I thought, okay, great, I can train indoors and I can carry on training. It just gave me an opportunity for me to take training seriously, and that was important to me. It was right on the campus. A lot of universities in the UK won't have tracks on the campus at all, be outdoor ones. So it would be okay if you want to train, then you're not doing it with the university. You're catching a bus or whatever to go and train with the club in that town. It's not, it's not integrated into university life, and it was just more of a hassle. Whereas with this, everything was on my doorstep, and it meant that I could take track and field seriously.
Well, makes sense.
And at the time, because of that, it meant that you had some fairly good athletes that were based there because it was an indoor track and field train. And I think it was at the time as well, it may have been the second permanent indoor 200 meter track in the UK. So it became like quite a good training venue for, let's say, some good athletes. And there was a guy training there called Darren Campbell. So Darren was the European 100 meter champion in 98. He won an Olympic silver in the 200 meters in 2000, and he got an Olympic gold medal in the 4x1 in 2004. And he also got a bronze medal at the World Championships over 100 meters in 2003. And he was coached by Linford. So Linford lived in London, but he sort of, I say remotely coached kind of a few athletes there. So he had Darren Campbell, a guy called Jamie Bolsh, who was a 400 meter runner, Catherine Merry, who was a 400 meter runner, Matt Elias, who was a 400 meter hurdler. And he'd also just taken on a young guy called Tim Abey, who's same age as me, a good 100 meter runner, sort of 10 to 100 meter guy. And so you'd see these guys there from time to time. You'd see Linford around time to time, and I was just a bit of a fanboy. So I go up and chat to these athletes and sort of, make small talk and have conversations. And then my third year at university, so start of 2005, I remember Darren asked me if I wanted to join in a workout. So I was like, yeah, of course, yeah, brilliant, thank you. So I joined in the session. Then I must have got his number during that session or something. Anyway, I gave him a call or gave him a text, said, look, is it all right if I do this on a regular basis? And he said, well, speak to the other two guys in the group, which was, as I say, so Tim Obey was one of the other guys. Spoke to Tim. He said, yeah, of course, no problem. Like, Tim's one of my closest friends now. So I said, Tim, how do you feel about that? And he was like, yeah, no problem. So I was training with Darren, and it was Linford that was setting the sessions pretty much. And Linford would probably come down once per week, like quite often on a Sunday. He'd drive from London, which was quite a long drive. It was a good sort of 2.5, 3 hour drive. So driving from London, and then we'd kind of go maybe another 20 miles further west of Cardiff, to a place called Murth Mower, which was just these massive sand dunes. So we'd be running up these, like, I don't know, there was one called the Big Dipper. I don't know, it looked big. I don't know how high it was. It was probably something like, it might not have even been 100 meters from top to bottom, but it was a fairly steep sand dune, and running up a sand dune is kind of like tough work. And Linford would pick us all up and then take us down there and stuff. So yeah, it was just really, as I say, being in the right place at the right time. And I guess, I'm quite outgoing when it comes to track. I like talking to anybody about it and sort of like putting myself out there a little bit.
No, I mean, the passion resonates very, very quickly.
Yeah, I'm passionate. Definitely something I'm passionate about. Yeah, for sure.
No, so shifting now a bit to coaching, a little bit of a personal note. You recently lost a mentor who you've told me has sort of, in a sense, gotten you into coaching. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there was a guy called Mike Leonard. So he passed away on Sunday. It was on the 16th. I think it was Sunday. And yeah, really sad kind of story. He got sick, he had cancer, and it sort of seemed manageable for a while, I believe. And then I think it quite sort of quickly sort of went downhill. So it was really quite sad. But he was kind of the second coach that I'd ever had. So I started training with Mike back in 2000, so over 20 years ago. And I think, through him, there's a lot of people that I've got a lot of close friends now that if it wasn't for Mike, that I wouldn't have met. So training with Mike, there was another one of my closest friends, a guy called Craig Pickering. And Craig Pickering, he's one of very few people in the UK, I believe less than 10, that have been selected for both the British British Summer Olympic team and the British Winter Olympic team. So he ran in the 2008 Olympics in the 100 meters, and then he got selected for the bobsleigh in 2014. Had to withdraw because of back injury, basically. It kind of curtailed his career. And then a guy called Greg Rutherford as well, another one of my closest friends, who he won the Olympic gold medal in the long jump in 2012. But both those guys were trained at Milton Keynes Athletics Club, which is where I'd met Mike, and Mike had kind of got me training there. So, although I haven't trained with Mike for years, we've carried on, we've been in contact and sort of bounced ideas off each other until, I think since I've been in Houston in the last year, we've had sort of like email exchanges talking about training stuff. So yeah, it's just it's very sad. And I think it really I hadn't really considered sort of how impactful he might have been on sort of the path my life took. If I hadn't have met him, I don't know that I would have been, around a lot of the people that I've been around, that has led to opportunities and also kind of allowed my passion to sort of develop, because I wouldn't have been around these high level athletes if it wasn't for him.
No. I mean, big shout out to Mike. God bless. I mean, it to an extent, the story there reminds me a lot of the track and field coach that I had at Dartmouth, Sandra Ford Santosi. She recently also passed away the very beginning of 2020.
I'm sorry to hear that.
From cancer. Yeah, no, I mean, she was a total icon on campus. Like you're saying about Mike, a woman that just touched so many people's lives in a very meaningful, personal, athletic, of course, way. Just the whole gamut of of things that you develop in a personal relationship with somebody. And to that extent, back to track and field itself, it's like, having been on a football team or two, there's a lot of football players, a lot of football coaches. Everybody's kind of, getting their football thing going on, which is like, sometimes it's real, sometimes it's a little bit of acting, I think, at times. Versus with track, like we were saying, it's like you see these coaches, they see you look at them in the eye when they tell you what the Monday workout is. And then you come through the line on the last one, and there's a human sort of vulnerability there, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's like your track coach at times sees you at your most, in a sense, heroic state, and also your most like vulnerable, like
Yeah.
I got nothing left coach kind of state.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that, I mean, it might be a little bit different in the UK than maybe it would be here, but I think like track and field is obviously an individual sport. And, in the UK, you could be training in very small groups, or, sometimes on a one-to-one basis. And like you say, if you finished a really kind of like tough lactic workout, like 300s off 10-15 minutes recovery or whatever it might be, then, that's really going to beat you up and leave you on the floor. And, your coach is there kind of going through that with you. So they're seeing you in that sort of very vulnerable state. And like you say, they see you in the heroic state as well, where, you've achieved a goal that you've been working towards for years or whatever. Then yeah, I think that, you do develop like this very sort of like close relationship with them. So yeah, absolutely agree with that.
So what was your first like official, given that you're a head coach now,
Assistant coach.
assistant coach, sorry,
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're fine.
but given that you're coaching today,
Mhm.
what was your first official coaching position, and then let's kind of start talking about the team.
Yeah, so I mean, like my first sort of like first paid coaching I did was living in Dubai. And it was, I mean, you could almost not call it coaching. I think it was sort of, I was consulting with basically kids that wanted to pursue track, and it wasn't, I didn't have my own group or anything like that. It was kind of, it might have been a standalone session, or I might have seen them once per week whilst they're doing their other workouts in track, or it might be from other sports or whatever. So I don't necessarily call that. I mean, I think the difference between, or my ideal view of coaching is you've got somebody there that's kind of like holding together the whole program and is sort of like in charge of, managing all those workouts. And that wasn't something that I was doing in Dubai. So, this would be the first kind of like paid in-person full-time coaching position. But it's always been something that I've wanted to try. And I've really enjoyed it. And we had a successful year last year. We're a very small Division 3 program. So 2021 was our first season. And I joined the team. I joined the University of St Thomas just after that season. So we grew from 6 athletes in 2021 to probably, I don't know, 18 or 19 last year. And then now we're pushing about 40 athletes. So we've got like a big team, or a much bigger team now. But last year we won the conference meet in the women's 4x1. We had 3 out of the top 6 finishes in the women's 100, 3 out of the top 6 finishes in the women's 200. We had a 6th place finisher in the men's 100. I think came 4th in the men's 4x1. We're doing pretty well, and I think this year's definitely going to be better. We've got a lot more depth now, and I think particularly on the men's side, that depth is really going to help us.
No, I mean, being obviously an avid follower of the team and your own, social, you can always sense when athletes are passionately devoting themselves to a workout.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can just tell, right? It's like in the shoulders or the hands or the faces or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes you need to kind of like teach them to hold back a little bit on it. I think there's such a thing as sort of like trying too hard in, like there are some workouts where you need to just leave everything out there, but I think there's also times where you need to be able to kind of like hold back a little bit.
No, but no, true. But when I watched the University of St. Thomas team, through your posts or the team's posts, you can tell that you guys are fostering a real culture of loving track, being a part of this kind of organization. And that's a really, really, really beautiful thing. I mean, anybody who's ever experienced it or been around it knows that that's a special thing that you guys are cultivating.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, like, the most important thing for me, especially at that level, is that just that they're enjoying the experience. And I think that, we work out early. We work out at 6:30 in the morning, just because of facility logistics and stuff like that. And, to get up in the winter to work out at 6:30 a.m., you know, you must love it.
Is that is
And
that is that the parking garage wind sprints?
so, yeah, so the parking garage, to be fair, that might have been 7 a.m. those
I
days.
I love those shots, by the way. Those are incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to get some resisted sprints in. We have a few sleds, but sleds are just, I don't know. I think I come from a teaching background, and I think when I was taught to teach, uh, they used to speak about like the pace of the lesson and kind of like, how the flow of the lesson goes and kind of keeping it up, keeping everybody engaged. And I just felt like with the sleds, the risk was that once we're kind of having somebody take the sled off or pull it back to give it to the next person, and that takes a little while, and it just kind of kills the vibe of the session a little bit. So just having them go up the ramp, it was easy. It was right there on our campus, and yeah, I think I really got the impression that they enjoyed it. It gave them a chance to be kind of competitive in a pretty safe environment. They're not going fast enough to pull hamstrings because the incline slowing them down, or shouldn't say they're definitely not going fast enough to pull hamstrings, but there's some sort of like risk mitigation by going up the incline in that regard. But it still kind of gave them the opportunity to be competitive, and it's just a short explosive. I think we were doing 30-meter runs up the ramp, and that they I think they enjoyed it. I think it was something that maybe they'd not all done a lot of, so it was good.
And that's a workout, at least like you said, that you're doing at like 6 in the morning, because it seems like the sun's coming up.
Yeah, it's early. It's very early. Yeah, that we do it. Yeah.
I think it's a brilliant thing. It almost, when I saw it, I was thinking to myself, I was like, more teams should be doing something like this. It just is like cool,
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to get some acceleration work in, and I thought that this, honestly, it just seemed the simplest way to get done what I wanted to get done. And at the same time, as I say, I think they found it fun. I think it was a fun thing, and it wasn't one of those workouts that's going to leave them dead on the floor afterwards as well, which probably kind of adds to the enjoyment a little bit more as well.
So, David, what else can you tell us about the team at St. Thomas this upcoming season?
So one of the main things that I've really noticed is that as we've grown, so if I compare just in my own training group last year, I had 8 athletes, whereas currently in this at the moment I have 19. So the group has just grown massively, and I think that that's brought with it, there's just a lot more of a vibe, a lot more of an energy at training, at the morning practices, which is good. You need a bit of a vibe at 6:30 in the morning, when you're turning up to training before the sun's come up. And I think that that's going to continue to develop. Just like a lot of the athletes are still kind of getting to know each other. A lot of the freshman athletes and they're getting to know the returners, and they're still getting to know me, and I'm getting to know some of them still. So once as those relationships kind of begin to or as they continue to develop, then I think that's just going to kind of add more to the positive energy that we're having at practice. And I think one of the things that I noticed last year as well is that the positive energy, it really started, or that the relationships really started to become sort of more meaningful, and everyone was more invested once the season had started, because we saw, kind of a little bit like you were saying, you saw the athletes maybe in more vulnerable situations, where they haven't performed as they wanted to, or in more successful situations where they finally they've achieved targets that they've set out for the year and stuff. So I think once that starts, which is going to be middle of January, we'll start competing indoors. And I think that once we have that, then, as I say, I think those relationships are going to, there'll be even more closeness kind of between the athletes and myself, and the athletes themselves as well.
No, for sure. And as you said, given that St. Thomas is located in Houston, which I know Houston is just a huge city.
Yeah, it's big. I didn't realize it was a bit as big as it is.
But at the same time, it has just, I think, probably one of the nation's more remarkable like sporting legacies.
Yeah, I mean, I believe we're the only non D1 school for 150-mile radius. So, we're kind of like nestled. We're very close to University of Houston, which, I mean, well, on the coaching staff last year, they had two separate 100-meter world record or former 100-meter world record holders, Carl Lewis and Leroy Burrell. So we had that. We're not too far from, we're very close to Rice University as well, which has had some great athletes come out of that program. Not too far from Texas A&M, again, like a sort of a formidable program. Drive a couple of hours up the road and you've got University of Texas. Again, very, very, very big D1 track and field program. But even some of the smaller D1 schools around us, such as like Prairie View, Sam Houston, Houston Baptist, there's a big sort of sporting legacy, I believe. And I think track and field as well, with kind of University of Houston, Carl Lewis, Santa Monica Track Club, sort of all training out of there. You potentially had, kind of going back to the 90s, and you potentially had three guys that could run 10 seconds, all training together in Houston. And around that time, that's quite a large proportion of the global population that could run the 100 meters in under 10 seconds.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. I mean, Houston's roots, in the track and field world, and how those roots, extend out into these other sports, whether it's basketball or football or whatever. It's pretty mind blowing. And I've oftentimes kind of just felt like speed sometimes is contagious, where it's like, especially when you think about the mental, physical connection that sprinters especially must have, like neurokinetically, like putting their foot on the ground and being able to lift it off again and get that sort of like acceleration and distance with the stride length and all that jazz.
Yeah, I mean, I think like if you want to get the maximum out of yourself in a given run, then trying to do it running by yourself or running with somebody significantly slower than you, you're probably not going to get it. Like you need somebody to sort of like push you, and you might not even get it if you're running with somebody significantly quicker than yourself. But if you have like if you make a workout fairly competitive or a run fairly competitive, then I think you're more likely to bring out the stopwatch is going to give you a better a more positive reading. It's going to be a quicker time, and I think there's a reason why there's not many elite sprinters in the world that train by themselves. Like typically that they form, okay, it might be small groups, but they form training groups, and arguably kind of the Santa Monica track, I'd have to check my history a little bit, but certainly in a professional setting, I believe like Santa Monica Track Club sort of almost kind of like pioneered that a little bit. They had, as I say, like three of the best guys in the world training together, and then a little bit later in the 90s you sort of had HSI with Atto Bolden, Maurice Green, John Drummond, those guys training together. And then you had Dan Paff's group that was based down here in Texas, but Bruni Surin, Donovan Bailey, Obadali Thompson. And I mean, the list in that group was that there was a lot of really quick guys in that group as well. But I think it holds you accountable, and it's probably like quite inspiring. If you see everybody else in your group running well, then it's like, oh, okay, right, okay, we're ready. And, it kind of gives you some confidence. And, a big part of this, I believe, is confidence as well. You can't, if it's not there physically, then confidence probably can't allow you to perform well. But I think that if it is there physically and you're not confident that you have it, then that can prevent you from performing well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I very much relate, I guess, the training life of a sprinter sometimes, and purists of boxing might completely disagree with this, but, right? But there is this sort of sparring partner kind of element to it, and like you said, like you do need the kind of, I guess, just hate saying this, but sort of certain God-given abilities to sort of step into the blocks and come out the blocks the right way and whatever. But at the same time, there's one of the most intriguing things about track is when you know that somebody has got a PR of X or Y, but they'll exceed it or fall beneath that. Sometimes based on just either their psychology heading into that race, or even sometimes when they want it so badly, you can tell that that person's starting to run tight.
Yeah, yeah,
Good
and
things never happen.
yeah, I feel like this kind of goes back to a little bit what I was saying about, like, you can push too hard in a workout. I think you can sort of want it to. I think if you want it, if you like, you need to be able to not control how much you want it, but to control the way wanting it a lot manifests. So you need to be able to kind of control that tension, control, that push it sort of, or control the emotion that comes with wanting it really badly. That's probably the better way of saying it. You still need to be able to, you know, as with anything, if emotion completely takes over, then you sort of like lose control of the situation. And I think that can be the same thing that happens in track and field. Like, you still need to be able to keep control over your emotions and over your mind, so that you're able to you're able to carry out the technique that you wanted to carry out. You're able to run with the mechanics that you've been rehearsing in training. But it is a bit of a balance, because, as I said before as well, like, you need somebody to push you as well. So you kind of do need a little bit of that adrenaline and a little bit of emotion, but you still need to be able to kind of control it. It's a bit of an oxymoron, really.
Yeah. No, it's it very much is the psychology of track and field. Is very much in a sense, I feel like the psychology of what I say, the psychology of can't knock the hustle, where it's like you know that there's a certain drive there, you know that there's a certain verve there, and at the same time, like, it has to be something that you sort of make happen, or sort of switch on inside of you, and you're controlling it, and there's that dial, right? Like that dial,
Yeah.
like you said, you can't crank that dial beyond the red line or whatever, because that's actually where you start going slower again.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, like, probably where you can crank the dial up to sort of varies from individual to individual, in terms of the way that, that some people, they run much better when there's no pressure, and some people need a lot of pressure in order to be able to perform. So, like, figuring out where that is, and I'd say that probably, um, as well, like, how stable an individual is with their technical skill. So, whether they're somebody that's kind of just, the way they run naturally is great mechanics, then they can probably afford to, like, press a little bit more, because their default is still to move with good mechanics. But if it's an athlete that's required sort of like a lot of polishing up in terms of how they've been running, then their default is probably going to be fairly poor mechanics. So, if you crank that dial right up into a highly pressurized situation, or they're feeling a lot of pressure, then you're likely to revert to default. And if that's not good technique, then you're probably not going to get the performance that you want.
Right. Yep. Yeah, no. It's all about good form, and good form typically leads to good style, and good style leads to typically victories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like, yeah, to get it is it's weird, because it's such like a primal event, just moving from over not a very big distance from point A to point B as quickly as you can. But at the same time, it's also very technical. Like, there's laws of physics that need to be abided by, in order to kind of help you cover that distance as quickly and effectively as possible. So yeah, it's absolutely, like, mechanics. Yeah, mechanics are this. They're number one on the list in terms of things that need to be addressed. And I don't necessarily know if they'll kind of guarantee you victory. I always sort of think that it's very hard to control whether you win or not, because you can't control what's happening in the lanes next to you, or who's in the lane next to you. But again, as I kind of referenced earlier, the objective measurement of track and field, like, you can sort of control how close you get to your PR, or if you beat your PR.
Yeah, no. Again, it's a mental game, a physical game, but nonetheless one that I've always found has the greatest amount of, like, mind body connection.
Yeah.
Maybe of any other sport beyond the martial arts, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I'd say that. I mean, I'm obviously biased. I'd say that's sort of like that's a fair comment. not that I have any experience in martial arts at all, but I think you definitely need to be cognizant of what you're doing, I think. And I remember reading in Carl Lewis's book that I think he was talking about the '88 Olympic final, and he said, he said it's a race that takes 10 seconds, but it felt like, might have even said 10 years, but his point was it felt a lot longer than it actually took, just because of all the subtle adjustments that he was making throughout the race. And like you say, like that's the mind body connection right there, is sort of course correcting as you're going through something that, to the average person that's watching it, doesn't seem like it's lasting very long, and probably doesn't feel like there's maybe time or need for subtle adjustments. But for somebody like Lewis, who was so in tune with it and so experienced and at such a high level, that he could see when things could be improved and could be optimized throughout the race and make those adjustments.
Yeah, no, I love the expression that days are long and years are short. And I think that, the same notion definitely applies. In my recollection, mostly applies to exactly how much longer a 200 feels on race day than it ever does in practice.
Yeah. I mean, my experience of a 200 was that if I wasn't in shape, then it just felt like the last 100 felt like such a long way. If I was in shape, then I think that it didn't feel so far, because I was just more in control of the situation. I think that, and I'm talking at a very mediocre level, because that was the level that I was competing at. But for me, if I was in shape, then I probably had a little bit more confidence. Then it meant that I could be a little bit more calculated going around the bend, and that left me with therefore a little bit more energy to utilize down the straight, which sort of magnified the effort the effect, the fact that I was in better shape as well. So I probably had like more energy overall. But if I wasn't in shape, A, there was less energy to give through over the 200 meters, and B, because of the lack of confidence, I didn't feel like I could be as calculated around, or I just wouldn't end up being so calculated around the bend. So I'd push it as hard as I could around the bend to try and just hang on to everyone. And then, I've spent what little energy I do have, and then it's a long, miserable straightaway.
It always brings a smile to my face because it, of course, pales in comparison to the people that are a part of that 4x4 race at the end of every meet. And
yeah,
and one of the things that I will always admire about the world of track is how some of the best meets, of course, always boil down to that event.
Mm-hmm.
And the people and the attitude around that 4x4, you want to talk about, like you said, the word primal. I mean, that's ground zero right there.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that you see some people that by far exceed their open 400-meter PR in a 4x4 relay. And I think that, like you say, primal, chasing someone down or know that you're being chased by somebody, I think that probably plays into that, to some degree. My experience of running 4x4s was that I just knew that it was going to hurt about 250. So with 150 meters to go, no matter what I did, it was going to hurt. Whether I split through 200 meters a second off my PR, or if I split through 4 seconds off my 200-meter PR, I get to 250 and it would hurt just the same. So I might as well get to 200 as kind of as quick as I can, and then just sort of like try and hang on. But I think it's just I think the relays are exciting because it's a team event in, what is largely an individual arena. And it's just, I think with the 4x4 as well, there's a little bit of physical contact in there potentially. And, there's more of an opportunity to see like people, I guess, like you're directly overtaken or being overtaken by somebody at speed, which, you don't see that in the, sprints because they're typically kept in lanes. And then in the distance races, they're not moving at the same speed that they would be in a sprint. So, perhaps it looks a little bit less exciting. But yeah, there's definitely something about the 4x4 that's, it's quite often the last event, and it's quite often late going on in the evening, but it becomes a spectacle and it's exciting.
I think it's the definition of the human spirit at work, at least when it's played out at its best. So I guess the final question here for you is, as you look at your next 12 months forward, and I guess reflect, on the year that we've all had. What are some of the things for you that are your personal goals, and what are some of the other things that you want to just make a note to shout out here?
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's kind of like in terms of the team, like the goals would be, I want to exceed what we did at conference last year. I think we had a very good women's 4x100 meter relay team, and I want to do something similar with the men. I think that with the women's 4x1, I want us to do better. I think I want us to run faster, and we're putting more stock now into exchanges and stuff like that, in order to kind of just optimize that. I definitely have, our school records at the moment, for the guys it's 11:00, so definitely have to want some guy, one of the athletes to take that underneath 11 seconds. And we've got athletes that can definitely do that. And then the women's school record, I'd love that to get closer to 12 flat, and I think that's very possible as well. I know we haven't sort of really touched on this, but I'm a masters athlete, or I try to be a masters athlete as well. So I turned 40 last month. So, like a nice target for me, I think, would be to see if I can run 100 meters in under 12 seconds in my 40s. So that's something that I definitely want to do. I'm just trying to figure out like the right sort of like training approach, like staying injury free. That's becoming more and more difficult, and how to adapt my training in order to be able to do that, and see if that's a possibility for me to try and do that. So yeah, there are a couple of things that sort of like we're working on.
Well, first of all, happy belated birthday.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Second of all, you look not a day above 30, whatever. Joking. And lastly, there's no doubt in my mind that you'll hit that target, just because you know what you're doing. The sport inside and out, and I'm excited to kind of track that progress with you this year.
I appreciate it. Like, certainly, if I do it, you'll hear about it. If I don't, then I might go a little bit quiet.
Makes sense.
But yeah, I mean, I'm fairly confident that if I could stay in one piece and block together, months, years of training, then I think I can do it. That's over the past few years, that's been the big thing, is sort of like figuring out the strategy. And I think, again, we spoke earlier about like wanting it too much, and this is an example of it, whereas sort of like sometimes discipline means resting, and or sometimes discipline means taking it easy. You can't just go out, you can't go red line every workout, because something's gonna happen. And even in the heat of a workout where you're feeling good and you're like, oh, do you know what, I can crank it up a little bit more, and that's not always a good idea. So I'm definitely trying to navigate that.
Well, I'm excited for us to watch and observe this this accomplishment of yours upcoming. And thank you so much for taking the time away from team and family today to connect with us on the pod.
No worries, John. I appreciate you inviting me to be on. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, anytime, happy to do it and catch up again soon, hopefully.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, sounds good.
All right, man. Cheers.
Cheers.